Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the 50th episode of Dhammapariyesanā series. Today, we will be discussing an important topic which has been always in the table of many scholars and non scholars. The topic for today's interview is going to be non religiousness in 21st century Japan. So, I'm joined by Dr. Kieko Obuse for this insightful interview. So I'm very happy that Dr. Kieko was able to accommodate for today's interview. Let me paraphrase Dr. Kieko's bio a little bit. Dr. Kieko Obuse holds a doctorate in the study of religion from the University of Oxford. She is currently an affiliate member of the School of Religious Studies, McGill University, and visiting researcher at Kobe City University of Foreign Studies, Japan. She has formerly taught at the College of Religious Studies, Mahidol University, Thailand. Looking at her research interests, her main research interests are Buddhist Muslim relations, Islam in Japan, and Buddhism beyond Asia, with an emphasis on the Thai Theravada tradition. She is a co editor of the Oxford Handbook of the Sociology of the Middle East, New York, Oxford University Press, online publication, which was started in 2020. Probably this is going to be published by the end of somewhere in the next year. She's also currently finishing a book manuscript tentatively titled Buddhist Muslim Engagement Doctrinal Negotiations in Southeast Asia and Japan. Dhamma folks, you can uh, see her publications on academia. You can see a description of the flyer. So you can see a variety of articles she has written about uh, Muslim Buddhist relationship in a broader, larger context. Dr. Kieko, I'm very happy to welcome you to our interview today. How are you doing
Thank,
today?
thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so uh, I guess we met on, we met somewhere like online, probably 10 years back, and
Mhm.
this encounter was I guess, halted for some reason. I don't know what happened, but you came back again, and because you moved to Canada a few years back.
Exactly.
I'm very happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's get into the topic today. Now, our topic, as I mentioned at the beginning, is non-religiousness in 21st century Japan. Now, I remember that when I look at this topic initially, the time that I learned some of the historical background of Buddhism in some countries, especially Asian countries, in Sri Lanka, it is always said that Japan is a Buddhist country. So this is something that I alluded to you in my non-informal, chat with you. So, you know, uh, looking at this topic from a broader perspective, I guess the popular image of the religiosity in Japan. I mean, before we talk about non-religiosity, it's kind of a paradox. I guess this is due to the Abrahamic monotheistic stereotype where they do, these large cross-cultural surveys through the angle of Abrahamic monotheistic stereotype, where they can find out there are religious people in Japan. So this might be the reason why they may have, you know, uh, I guess, concluded in many surveys, like even the surveys we see in 2012, published by, I guess, Global Index of Religiosity and Atheism. It says that only 16% of people self-identify as religious people. In addition to that percentage, 31% people only self-identify as convinced atheists. But the record that we see under Japan statistic Bureau says that 87.9 million people uh, seem to be Shinto adherents, and 84.6 million people seems to be Buddhist. Probably the combined number of these figures could be greater than the population of Japan, 126 million. So this shouldn't be a calculation error, but it illustrates that people in Japan seem to be like somewhat dismayed in accepting that they are religious, but when uh, when they when they look at their own personal interest about their spirituality, they might, I guess, fall into different, uh, religious, spiritual traditions. So this looks to be a kind of a paradox. Probably the scholars, they are mostly advocating that we shouldn't look at the Japanese religiosity and the non-religiousness through the Abrahamic, monotheistic stereotypes, because you won't find out religious people in Japan if you only look at uh, you know what they hold in terms of religiosity. So, in order to start this conversation, I would like to uh, ask your take on about kind of a fundamental definition about what does it mean to be a religious or non-religious person from a theoretical standpoint before we jump into the Japanese context.
Okay, thank you very much for the question and also for the very useful introduction to the discussion of Japanese religiosity in general. I will come back to some of the points that Bhante has already mentioned in his introduction, but just in response to the question, yes, so what religion is or what it means to be religious has been a subject of continuous and really heated debate among scholars. So, the first thing I want to say is that perhaps we should not accept religion as a given, namely as something universally existing in the same way everywhere. But we should rather stay somewhat skeptical about its usefulness as a category, especially when discussing non European contexts. So, a little bit about the word religion itself. The word religion was conceptualized within the European academia in the 18th to 19th century. And because of this, religion and many other concepts used to describe religion reflect a Christian or particularly Protestant Christian perspective. So, typically, the focus is on belief, which is expressed in propositional creeds or creedal formulas, and therefore it's a very individualistic and intellectual concept. So, given this, the most basic definition of religion along this line would be religion as a belief in God, right? And even today, as Bhante has just mentioned, as you know, many people think of religion along this line. But this is not exactly how it is conceived in academia. Having said that, unfortunately, there is no one single authoritative definition of religion used in academia today because the discussion is still going on. It is very heated sometimes. But there are three basic points, I think, that are highlighted in all major influential descriptions of religion. So I want to mention these. So, first, religion is understood primarily in terms of what people do. So you may call it practice. So this includes prayers, meditations, celebrations of holy days, and pilgrimages, and life cycle rites such as marriage and funerals, but also more generally how people go about life. So, for instance, what they eat and how they dress, how they interact with each other. So, basically, being religious is primarily about doing how you are rather than thinking or believing. So, that's the first point. And secondly, so these activities or practice, if you like, in a broader sense of the term, revolve around the sacred. And this is an important buzzword, as it were, in describing religion in academia. And this word, the sacred, it covers, if you like, God, gods, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Kami, which is basically Shinto deities, but much larger concept than deities as such, saints and other types of holy beings, as well as certain kinds of animals and even non-animate things such as holy books, places, images, and statues, also natural objects such as mountains, trees, stones that are considered extraordinary or non-mundane, or if you like to consider it as having something of a special power. So that's the second factor. The third and the final point is that in all this, an emphasis is placed on the collective aspect of these actions. And these lead to solidarity amongst practitioners and creating a specific ethos within the community. So you would have a shared sense of history and tradition, etc. And this communal aspect is emphasized greatly in academic study of religion or understanding of religion. So these are the three main points. But we should also bear in mind the term religion means different things to different people. So, as I said, religion is originally a European concept, although this concept has translations or equivalents in non-European languages. And for example, the Japanese word for religion is shukyo. In Sinhala, if I'm not mistaken, it is agama. And in Thai, it is sasana. So these words are comparable, but do not mean exactly the same thing. Therefore, I would say when we talk about religion in Japan, like we're doing today, we should pay close attention to how the term religion or shukyo is used in Japanese context. So that will be my answer.
Oh, great. So you brought up the Japanese term for religion. You said shukyo, and do you see any origins to this term? I mean, was it how do you call that particular era? Meiji era?
Yes, yeah. It was adopted as a Japanese translation or equivalent of the English word religion. Um, in the 19th century, and this is the time that when the government was opening up its doors to the outside world and started negotiating with Western powers, especially the US. So in order to negotiate with them the terms of their, dealing with each other, they needed to use the word religion. I think Americans probably asked the Japanese.
Okay.
So
So
this is the beginning.
in Japan,
Mhm.
what do you think about the Japanese, perception about religion, the term religion? I mean, this is kind of something off the topic. Second question. So I understand that people in Japan seem to be kind of, embarrassed or seem to be a little bit, I guess, sort of. Fanatic about some people are fanatic about the religion, the term, especially you remember the 1995 gas attack in a subway, and this was actually reflected as a kind of a I guess reflection on a particular religious group. So people, what is your take on about the Japanese perception about religion in general, before we jump into whether they have religion or not? When I mean, I guess this question is a little bit embarrassing and probably dismaying to many, uh, to know whether you have religion or not.
Right, yeah, that's a very good point. And actually, I was going to touch upon that a little bit later, but now that it has been brought up, so the thing is, as you mentioned, if you go to Japan and you see a lot of temples and shrines, right, and then receiving a lot of visitors, paying respect there and then stuff. So from the outside, the Japanese look quite religious. I mean, in the way that they move around and visiting temples and shrines. But then, if you ask them the question, do you have a religion or are you religious? And most of them would say, "Whoa, no, 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 we don't have religion. We're not religious." The word they use is mushukyo, non-religion or non-religious. And I just said, and very rightly, I have to say, I agree with you, there are two major factors for this. You call it embarrassment, but I would put it more like hesitation or a reservation about claiming to have a religion or claiming to be religious. And the first is the fact that the term religion is fairly recent and still an alien concept. And it doesn't really describe what they feel or what they do in a kind of a traditional religious, for a lack of better term, context. So that's the first thing. And the second is also, as you said, is the general suspicion many people have developed towards religion through, especially in the 1960s and the 70s up to 80s, 90s, through the aggressive proselytization activities and also criminal activities of some religious groups. So this has made them quite so suspicious and a little bit alert on religion as such. So I perfectly agree with you.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Let me get into the next question. I wanted to look at uh, kind of an interface to see this next question through a book which was written by Toshimuro Ama. Why are the Japanese non-religious? The Japanese spirituality being non-religious in a religious culture. Probably this was written in Japanese, but it was translated by some others. According to Ama, I guess what he says is that the Japanese generally lack an understanding or of desire to commit to a particular organized religion, oftentimes fusing Shinto, Christianity, and Buddhism into a hybrid form of spirituality. This kind of echoes what they are primarily, holding as a standpoint about, religion and spirituality. We do know that spirituality, the term spirituality, is a bit acceptable form to many because it is kind of an alternative to the big word called religion. So it's more likely, welcomed by many, because some people might say this is kind of a privatization of religion. I mean, people like to be spiritual but not to be religious. I mean, this is the norm in many countries, even in Canada. So my next question for you is, can you identify, probably name some of the major religious and non-religious groups that exist in contemporary Japan? But I can get into the third question before I talk about that. What are your thoughts on the following Japanese characterizations of religious nons or non-religious people? Believing without belonging, belonging without believing, believing in belonging. So, uh, have you ever come across these kind of communities? Believing without belonging, belonging without believing, believing in belonging.
Okay, thank you for these two set of questions. It's great that you asked them together because I was going to.
Probably we can actually talk about you know
Mhm.
these three types of groups, and then talk about the contemporary Japanese, religious and non-religious groups a little bit.
Right. So let's start with religious groups, and then briefly, I'd like to talk about the survey that Bhante Chandima has just mentioned in introduction. And this is the annual survey conducted by the Japanese government, and it's actually only virtually the only official survey result or survey information data, survey data about Japanese religiosity. So, according to this survey, quickly I recap. In 2017, there are about 86 billion followers or believers of Shinto. And as part of this, there are 85 million Buddhists, well, Buddhists, quote unquote, and then nearly 2 million Christians, And again, nearly 8 million followers of other groups, so that are not Shinto, that are not categorized as Shinto, nor Buddhism, nor Christianity. So in total, approximately 181 million religious believers were reported. And that's a lot of people, right? And it looks like the Japanese are very religious if you go by this kind of survey data. But obviously, as Bhante rightly said, the interesting thing is that the entire population of Japan in 2017 was about 126 million, about 55 million people less than the total number of religious believers. So what is happening here, right? So why are more people registered as religious believers than the entire population of the country? And then there are two possible reasons. The first is more administrative, if you like. The figures reported in this survey are actually provided by religious organizations themselves. So therefore, there is always the possibility that numbers may be inflated. They report bigger number than actually they actually have. The second one, as Bhante indicated earlier on, some people are affiliated with more than one religious organization. So a typical Japanese person would be listed first as a member or follower of a particular Shinto shrine, which counts as one religious organization, and also as a member of a Buddhist temple. That's another one. So you at least counted twice, right? And you may even be counted 3 times. For example, if you convert Christianity or some other religion later in your life and your name is registered there, so you're counted 3 times. So briefly and also tentatively, we can say that from this type of survey data, that Shinto and Buddhism are the major religions in Japan, but surely there are people who are not counted within this scheme of investigation. So I think this kind of goes to the next question: religious nuns or non-religious in inverted commas. And here I want to introduce 2 other survey results for the purpose of comparison. And this time, importantly, the questions were asked to individuals, not to the religious organizations. So the first is called the Japanese National Character Survey, conducted slightly old this one, in 2013. And here are the 2 of the questions, which I think is very interesting to compare. The first question is, do you have a religious faith or faith? And to this question, 28% of the people said, yes, I have a religious faith. The second question is, do you believe in life after death? And what do you think? 40% of the people said yes. This clearly shows believing life after death is not the same as having a religious faith. So this is very interesting. Now, the second survey, called Japanese Social Survey, is from 2017. And here the main question, there are lots of questions, interesting question here, but the main question is, do you believe in religion? They use the word belief. To this question, only 9.2% of the people said, yes, I do. So this is quite similar to the data that Bhante quoted earlier on. And if you compare the 2 sets of data, we see that for the Japanese, having a religious faith as such is not the same as believe in religion, and let alone as believe in life after death. So, as we have already noted, there is a collective hesitation about claiming to believe in religion, right? And again, as Bhante mentioned, that this may be comparable somewhat to the trend in the West today, by which I mean North America and Europe, especially Western Europe, where many people claim to be spiritual but not religious, and mainly because of the distrust of institutional religions. But situation in Japan is a little bit more complicated. And then this is because of the two factors we already discussed. So the religion is first, religion is a relatively new term in Japan, coined, adopted in the 19th century. The word shukyo was adopted in the 19th century. And another factor was the suspicion that many people have towards organized religions. And if I may add, my impression is that, and this also partly echoes with the reflection that Bhante shared with us earlier on, that the shukyo, the Japanese term for religion, shukyo for many Japanese means organized or institutionalized religion that require high-level, exclusive, and if I may add, personal commitment through accepting certain truth claims, basically believing in something. And within this scheme, religions, in their mind, would include Christianity, Islam, and some new religions, and maybe, possibly some forms of Buddhism, which require exclusive commitment. Right. So this is my impression. So given this situation, it's very difficult to describe Japanese religiosity with expressions such as believing without belonging and etc. And that's because, as I said, the concept of belief in English refers to an acceptance of propositional creeds. So for example, you believe God to be like this or like that. This is belief or propositional creeds. Rather than saying they believe in Buddhism or believe in the Buddha, Japanese people, on the other hand, are more likely to say, for example, they go to the temple to make offerings to a Buddha. That's their way of saying they do something called maybe Buddhism, or they practice Buddhism. Now, but having said that, if you really want to stick to the word belief, I personally think, and this is my personal impression, that the way the Japanese believe in kami or Buddhas is more like what the Pali word sada means. So that is faith in the sense of trusting or relying on something, rather than believing them to be this way or that way. So I want to hear what you think about this.
I wanted to quote about that with a particular English word called orthodoxic to orthopraxic context of practicing religion and spirituality. So orthodoxic means an emphasis on belief. That means so much kind of belief context in any religion, any other, I would say, movements. And orthopraxic means greater stress on external behavior rather than internal belief. So I guess Japanese people seems to be on the second, I guess, a little bit more orthopraxic. I mean, even in Buddhism, we understand that we need to practice more than what we believe. So I guess this is what I look at the particular context. In addition to what you brought up today, I wonder uh, why there is a confusion in understanding the term religion in the Japanese context. Is it because is that the religion in the West is not what the Japanese people believe in Japan, or they have their own way of practicing religion, which is not easily found out by these large cross-cultural surveys in the West? Why the Western cross-cultural surveys always say the Japanese are more likely atheists or non-religious? Is it because their criteria or whatever the things that they do are not enough adequate to understand the Japanese religiosity? That is why they say they are non-religious. Because what we understand, even by the Japan Statistic Bureau, that there are millions of Shinto practitioners and Buddhist practitioners, but they are not traced well by the Western standards. Why is it? Is it because the Japanese people have their own religiosity, but it is not easily traced by the Western standards, because this is the norm. I mean, people might say people always look at the Western standards.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's actually both. Because what you say, the two things you said, the first of the problem of the use of Western, basically Western concepts related to religion, being applied to, as it were, in search for something similar in non-Western context. That also is another way of, another way of saying that is that whatever is happening in Asia or a non-Western context, say in Japan or in Sri Lanka, is not exactly that. So I think two things are actually saying pretty similar things.
So you think
And
that
I think
the both work, both
yeah.
Japanese
So
context and the Western context, they
mhm.
both add up to uh, the notion of confusion, I guess. You know, but why the Japanese people are not religious? Japanese people have their own way, and this is not easily traced by others in the West.
Yeah. Yes. So I think what is happening when surveys like this, whether it is done by Japanese people themselves or the Western, or non-Japanese people from outside who work with the idea of religion and all the other cognate concepts were involved, is trying to find something similar in non-Western concepts, whether they consciously do that or not, because by using Western concepts, it really, that means you are already sort of making boundaries, and then by using these concepts, you are setting the rules of the game, as it were. So anything that does not fit into these parameters will be either distorted and then come up with a really kind of a wrong, sort of unrealistic survey data, or just completely lost in the chaos. So that's why I said in the beginning, that's quite bluntly, that we have to be skeptical about the usefulness of the concept of religion and its applicability. Yes, it is. We cannot really get rid of it because it is so commonly used, and it has some use. But we should not assume that this thing called religion, whatever your understanding of it, is found in a similar way everywhere in the world.
Now in
And
the
that
West.
is, yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Kieko, are you familiar with the Japanese term called Nihon Jinron?
Yeah.
So, seemingly, Japan, as a unique country that cannot be understood through conventional analysis and theories, probably they have their own standards of looking at it. But regardless of that, uh, we wanted to see that this notion of whether Japanese people are religious or not has to be looked at in both ways, I guess, from the Western perspective as well as from their own perspective. Okay, let's move on to the secularization. So, can you a little bit delineate about the Japan's secularization of religion with a particular emphasis on the Buddhism's evolution? I guess you know. When it comes to Buddhism, I think the state has, largely affected its practice, especially to the monastic community and so on and so forth. So, what are your thoughts on Japan's secularization of religions with an emphasis of Buddhism? You can sort of delineate a little bit about other religions as well as Buddhism in particular.
Okay, thank you. Well, secularization is a complex concept and complex phenomenon. So, for the sake of simplicity, let us today talk about decline or the change in the level or nature, change in the level of religious observance. And here I want to mention one major series of historical developments that have influenced the way that Buddhism has come to be practiced in Japan. But before that, before talking about development of Buddhism in Japan, let me briefly mention what kinds of Buddhism we have in Japan. So in a chronological order, first we have two esoteric schools called Tendai and Shingon schools. And both schools were founded in the 9th century by the elite monks who went over to China and studied, cutting edge sort of teachings and practice. And then in around the 13th century, more new types of Buddhism emerged. And then I will mention three types. First is Zen, which is quite famous in the West as well. It is focused on Zazen or seated meditation. And the second is Pure Land Buddhism. This one is focused on the worship of Buddha Amitabha or Amida in Japanese, who is believed to regarded as some sort of a savior figure. The third is Nichiren type of Buddhism, and this one is focused on the power of the Lotus Sutra, which is one of the major Mahayana sutras. So it is centered around the trust in the efficacy of or power of this particular sutra. So among these, Zen and Pure Land Buddhism are the biggest in terms of the numbers of followers reported today as in the governmental survey results. Right. So back to history. So in the middle of 17th century, the shogunate is a samurai rule, a samurai government they had back then. They ordered everyone, like literally everyone, to be affiliated with a Buddhist temple. And this was in order to prove that they were not Christian. So this is part of the sort of Christianity persecution policy of the government then. Through this policy, Buddhism came to enjoy a special and very stable status, although a bit controlled by the government. Now, in terms of actual practice, being affiliated with a temple meant that people would have funerals and memorial services performed for the deceased member of the family by the temple that they are affiliated with. And these people, as a family, would make financial contributions to the upkeep of the temple, or you can call it dana in Buddhist term. So through this policy called temple registration system or terauke system, the major practice for the lay people became quite similar across different schools. That is, it focuses on funerals and memorial rites where the main thing is the chanting of scriptures or okyo, literally sutras. So this was the situation. But in the 19th century, towards the end of Edo period, there arose movements in various regions in Japan against the dominance of Buddhist temples. And this was also the official policy of the Meiji government. That is to destabilize Buddhism in order to promote their new emperor-centered governance. And to this end, Meiji government issued a series of decrees, and we'll briefly have a look at this. First, they abolished the temple registration system that I mentioned earlier, and also lifted the ban on Christianity. This means that Buddhist temples, which up to that point had enjoyed a very prestigious and privileged status in Japanese society, now had to compete with not only with each other, but also with other religions for followers. Therefore, in order to survive, traditional Buddhist schools came up with accessible practice for the lay people. For example, Zazen, the seated meditation, which is a symbolic practice of Zen schools, was removed from the basic lay repertoire because it was deemed as too difficult for them, right? But in this, among these decrees that were promulgated by the Meiji government, most important ones was the decree about the lifestyle of Buddhist monks. So it was decreed that Buddhist monks were now free to eat meat, get married, and grow hair. And this, I think, has really undermined the distinction between monastics and the laity, as Bhante was mentioning earlier on, which I think is the traditional ethos of Buddhist practice. So this is what happens. So obviously, this is not the whole story, but I think this political sort of socio-political change in history has affected the way that Buddhism has come to be practiced in Japan today.
So did the state ask the monastic community to change from eating this to that and then to get married? I mean, was the state liberal about it, or what's the purpose behind the state to ask the monastic community to change,
Mhm.
secularize a little bit more from being a little bit hardcore on the practice? Why?
Right. Why? Why? The simple answer would be to destabilize Buddhism, as I said, because they probably knew that monasticism, whatever the level of practice back then, because monasticism wasn't always perfectly practiced, but at least as an ideal, it was there, right? So the government probably knew that in order to destabilize Buddhism, they can just hit at the hit the most important and symbolic thing in Buddhism, which was monasticism. And it was a decree, so therefore it was not a request as such. They didn't force them to do that, but it was like decreed. The wording was really like, henceforth Buddhist monks are free to do these things. They're free to do it.
No, I'm asking
Yeah.
not from the perspective of whether monks and nuns they're getting freedom to do whatever uh,
Mhm.
they can do. You know, against what we see in other countries like Thailand, Sri Lanka, that monks are not supposed to do such things to
Mhm.
keep the exact Vinaya and all that. I'm just looking at why. I mean, you said that the Japanese state did that to destabilize
Mhm.
Buddhism and they to secularize it. I mean, what was their purpose behind that move? Is it just something that they thought that if monastic community can shift their perspective into what they think, I mean, what the state think, uh, do you think that the Japanese government thought that this would be a good move for the country's religiosity or probably the development of people's mindset? Uh, I'm just curious
Okay,
about
yeah, I
what
understand
the
the question.
government
Yeah.
thinks about this particular move. Were they thinking? Did they have an ulterior motive of doing asking this or letting them to do this, and then expecting a kind of a development in terms of the whole culture? Uh,
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I understand what you mean by government aim or purpose. Um, you have painted a potentially very friendly and a very nice a picture of what government might have been thinking, but I do not think they were thinking in that kind of very edificational way about the development of Buddhism in this way, secular way, potentially helping the spiritual development of Japanese people in the new era, sort of thing. I think my understanding, which I have to say is not very comprehensive, is that Meiji government was really desperate to promote this new emperor-centered nation-building ideology, which later manifested itself in this very expansionist sort of a nationalistic sort of military ethos. So whatever they decided about Buddhism was not for the sake of Buddhism's growth or development, but it just simply put Buddhism down. So hopefully, and then Shinto will come up.
okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Right. And so therefore, another decree that they promulgated at the beginning of the Meiji era was to the order or decree order order for Buddhism and Shinto to be separate,
Mhm.
and then persecute Buddhism.
Okay, so
So it was
this is more likely about promoting Shinto uh,
yeah, yeah.
by putting Buddhism in limbo, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking the government did that in order to see kind of a liberal standpoint of all religious traditions in the country, so that neither religious or spiritual tradition is trying to take dominance in the country so that the people have kind of a peaceful thought. But it's not. He said that it is just because they wanted to promote Shinto. That's why they did it. They wanted to secularize.
That's
Okay.
a fascinating reflection, though, Bante, because I mean, it is true that, and to some extent, this kind of idea of a liberalized freedom of religion sort of thing was definitely there. I mean, because they were getting new ideas and technology from the West, where the freedom of religion was quite important. But in reality, yeah, it didn't go that way.
Okay. Great.
Let's just put it that way. Yeah.
So, do you think that this shift, I mean, could have happened in a better way? And if that happened, things could have happened totally in a different way. I mean, if the government did not ask the Buddhist traditions to be secularized at that point,
Mhm.
I guess this happened in 80th centuries, right?
19th
80th
century.
centuries,
Uh-huh.
century. So if the government hadn't done that,
Mhm.
so things would have happened totally in a different way. This is what you think for today,
It's hard to say, but I think um,
because we talking about the evolution. You know,
mhm,
regardless of what the government asks, religiosity or spiritual traditions, they are subject to uh, evolve, right? Uh, being Japan is kind of a very you know I guess cutting edge techie country. At the same time, people are you know people like to believe I guess kind of a very liberal kind of a mindset. I guess this particular change could have been a milestone, uh,
mhm.
in the perception of uh, well-being of many. I guess I'm not saying that this was a good move, but if this was not happen, I think things could have happened in a totally different way.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The similar thing might have happened even without the government intervention.
Hmm.
But
Um,
symbolic importance of that would have been felt slightly different for the Buddhists themselves. And I don't really know exactly
okay.
how that would have come up.
If you can remember the 17th century Sri Lanka in the Kandyan
Mhm.
era, uh, there were monks who married to women,
Mhm.
and they didn't wear robes. They only wore kind of a thread, I guess,
Mhm.
that reflected that they are monks. And then what happened? They were actually pretty much spending kind of a uh, lay life for some reasons. But people really appreciated those monks. But
Mhm.
then Velibitier Sangaraja Thera, he was actually a little bit uh, upset about this, and then he went to Thailand and brought Pasampada
Mhm.
recognition to Sri Lanka. Anyways, I think these things wouldn't have happened without the support of the government, I guess, even in Sri Lanka, the Kandyan era, because the kings and probably they had their patronage to these monks and nuns. But anyway, things got back to normal, and now they are
Mhm.
totally, I guess, continuing with that ancient practice.
That is fascinating. Thanks for sharing, Bante. Because I mean, I should have mentioned this, but there is a slightly comparable development in Japan. So one of the major Pure Land Buddhist schools in Japan that started in the 14th, 15th century and became quite big in the 16th century and onwards, called Jodo Shin School, Jodo Shinshu, or True Pure Land School. This school has the half monastic, half lay status of the priest. So, the founder of the school, Shendan, advocated that, well, you know, we can be, we can not we can be, but he decided that he would go ahead and get married and eat meat and everything because not because he wanted to have a nice life, but because through his own training and to be enlightened and everything, he realized that then he just human beings are not capable of doing it through their own efforts, but it has to be they have to be helped by a higher power, which is in his case Amida Buddha. So therefore, as a symbolic act of giving up this obsession with the idea that you can do it, this kind of egocentric sort of idea that you can do it, you have the power to get enlightened, he decided to really break with these monastic rules, or the celibacy rules of celibacy and vegetarianism and so on. So this significant step was already taken in the 14th century. So given this, it is possible that other schools might have done the same thing or might have not have done the same thing because it is regarded as their own way of doing things. And then rival schools might have not liked
Yeah.
to join them, right? So
Yeah. That's a very an interesting move, actually, especially in any spiritual or religious traditions. Okay, can you explain to us a little bit about some of the vibrant non-religious movements? Because our actually topic is about non-religious movements, going from religious movements. So, what are the some of the vibrant non-religious movements, including Buddhism and others, in Japan, and their impact on the country's main society? Because as we understood from, I guess, from Toshimaru Ama, uh, you know, we can see that there is a kind of a fusion of Shinto, Christianity, Buddhism into a hybrid form of spirituality in some people, in many people. So, looking at that, do you identify some of the very big, I'd say, large scale or small scale non-religious movements in Japan? And what's the impact of these institutions or traditions on the current modern Japan?
right. This may not be exactly what you may call a non-religious movement as such, but as I just said, the traditional Buddhist practice was affected by the political changes in the 19th century onwards. But at the same time, around this time, there also emerged many movements outside, or let's say, on the periphery of the mainstream religious system, in response to the great societal changes. And some of these new movements were based on teachings or practices found within the traditional Buddhism or Shinto, or sometimes both together, or even some Christian elements, while others were inspired by spiritual experiences, which you may call revelations or possessions, that happens to individual, and many of these individuals are from rural areas and are often women. So it's sort of new, sort of gushing out of the movements on the periphery of the mainstream religion. And these movements are generally called new religions, Shin Shukyo, as opposed to older types of more established types of religion. And they have come to have a tremendous influence and presence in Japanese, later Japanese history, particularly after the end of World War II. New religions grew significantly, especially amongst the families in urban areas, because many of these families had moved away from their hometown in the rural areas, in remote areas of Japan, and therefore lost their connection with their local Buddhist temple or Shinto shrine that they grew up with. So, new religions provided these new families with a new social space as well as practice specifically geared towards their socio-economic and spiritual well-being. And they became very, very influential and very, very popular. Some of these new, very successful new religions have always also been active in other fields, such as education. You know, they establish universities, medicine, they have hospitals, politics. They're running for political offices and having political parties, and other social welfare activities like humanitarian activities and so on. So therefore, they have a stable, influential presence in Japanese society today. And a good example of this is many of you have heard about this, but Soka Gakkai, an influential lay Buddhist organization known outside Japan as Soka Gakkai International (SGI).
Mhm.
Their practice is centered around the trust in the power of Lotus Sutra, I mean, in line of Nichiren Buddhism I mentioned earlier. And another example, I think we have to also talk about more recent new religions,
Yeah.
which arose around the 1970s onwards, have tended to be more individually oriented rather than family oriented, which is the traditional mode of religion, as you have already talked about. So these religious groups tend to draw membership from younger generations whose needs are more, let's say, spiritual, or for the lack of a better word, rather than socioeconomic,
Mhm.
like in the right after the war. So the most famous example is Omu Shinrikyo, which carried out the sarin gas attack on Tokyo underground in 1995, as Bhante mentioned earlier. And I mention Omu Shinrikyo here not really for the purpose of highlighting the problematic nature of the activities, but rather my point is to show, to say that the expansion of new types of new religions, many of which are perfectly legal, indicates that traditional forms of religion, be it Buddhism, Shinto, or even older type of new religion, somehow failed to cater for the spiritual or religious or whatever needs of younger generations. And here I really hope the traditional Buddhist schools will contribute to resolving this.
Why why are these traditional type of religious okay, all less religious movements or traditions not, you know, able to fulfill the younger generation's perceptions or needs of religiosity? Why is it? Is it because that they don't want to actually adapt, or those ancient practices are being only carried out in a way that they were done in those decades? Is it because the sort of people don't like to change, or is it because younger generations, they have their own ways of looking at it?
Well, I think this should be a combination of reasons, but clearly, the traditional types of religion, be it Shinto or Buddhism, have failed to adapt to the needs of the new needs of the time, and this is interesting. I mean, if you think about, for example, in Thailand, um, where Buddhism is practiced more, let's say, less nominally and more seriously in amongst people. Even there have been new forms of Buddhism, which started off as a very controversial groups, like such as Santia Soke and
Dhammapariyesanā.
Dhammakaya,
Mhm.
right? And then many scholars actually said that these are a little bit comparable to new religions in Japan, and the main reason for their success, despite being also Buddhism,
Mhm.
like some type of Buddhism, they have ticked the boxes for the younger generations who are not really happy with the older, traditional type of Buddhism. So there is a comparable situation there. And then, yeah, I tend to agree with this speculation.
Mhm. Great. Okay, can you delineate a little bit about what does being a Buddhist mean in both ancient and modern Japan? So now we are kind of boiling down to Buddhism now, the Buddhism in Japan, both ancient and modern. So, what are your thoughts about being a Buddhist in ancient Japan and modern Japan? So, do you see? I guess I don't know. I mean, your parents' background, your grandparents' background. So, how do you see a Buddhist in ancient Japan and in modern Japan, uh, in your own understanding?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, what does it mean to be a Buddhist? So as I said before, the end of the 19th century and probably well into the 20th century, being Buddhist was the norm for many people because of the what happens in in Edo period and the like. So that meant being affiliated with the temple as a family and then perform funerals and memorial rituals for the deceased members of the family in a Buddhist way through a specific temple. This means what it is to be a Buddhist for them. But at the same time, they also kept up with the communal life revolving around the local Shinto shrine. So they would make offerings to kami and hold seasonal festivals in the shrine. So it was more of a Shinto Buddhist combined practice. And today, to some extent, the same criterion is still valid for many, especially in rural areas. But as you notice that the awareness of traditional Buddhist practice is decreasing amongst younger generations. So even those whose family is affiliated with Buddhist temple, so let's say born Buddhists, are probably much less likely to identify themselves as Buddhists. So what it means to be Buddhist is definitely changing. And on the other hand, those who practice Buddhism out of personal choice are still very much a minority. You know, there are lots of people who are tuning into the Theravada Buddhist groups, Dhamma talks in Japan, but you know, so thus the interest in meditation may be increasing and the like, but it is difficult, it is doubtful if the practitioner of Buddhist meditation or listeners of Dhamma talks would always call themselves Buddhists. And this situation is pretty much comparable with the trend in the West, as Bhante mentioned earlier on. Many people are interested in Buddhism and practice meditation, but do not claim to be Buddhist, right?
Even
So,
Buddha did not call himself a Buddhist.
oh no, but Jesus was no Christian.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
Jesus was a
that's an
Jew.
interesting thing.
Yeah.
There are people who sometimes don't practice what they can hear, especially what they can see, but they want to sacrifice their life for Buddhism. That's pretty scary sometimes, you know. So when we brandish these religious things, probably the way that how people think, yeah, it's kind of a bit scary to some. So yeah, so ancient Buddhists and a modern Buddhist definitely demonstrate a difference uh, in the ways of practice, and even as you said, most of the people who learn, who actually listen to Dhamma talks, and they hardly, I know in Sri Lanka people like to proclaim that they are Buddhists. As you said that in the West, when they practice Buddhism, they don't want to say that we are a Buddhist, but they simply want to practice mindfulness meditation. If you go to an Asian country like in Sri Lanka, in those countries, if you look at people who meditate, uh, I guess a large number of people they practice ritual things, which is good for them, but only a few number of people practice meditation, and those people they are very serious about meditation, especially they want to liberate themselves from the samsara. In the West, they don't have this perspective. They just practice it to cope up with their stress, depression, anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are differences even in modern Japan uh, in regard to somebody who practiced Buddhism in olden days. Okay, this is something kind of I guess manifests the proposition of our topic today. Is Japan a religious country, a nation? Can we call it a Buddhist nation? We know that the Abrahamic monotheistic stereotype kind of condemns the true practitioners of the Buddhism, I guess. But the newest one, the Japanese Statistic Bureau did, was a bit more reflecting about what is really going on. So, what are your thoughts about understanding or uh, accepting Japan uh, as a religious country or a Buddhist country? Can we call it a Buddhist country?
Okay, excellent question. So, as for the first one, is Japan a religious nation? On an official, therefore national level, Japan is not a religious nation because it doesn't have a state religion. In the constitution, freedom of religion is guaranteed, and that there is no mention of any type of religion as having a particular special status. Shinto, as many of you know, was the centerpiece of Japanese governance until the end of the World War II, but it no longer has that status. But having said that, obviously Shinto as a tradition associated with the imperial family, which still exists, does have a special type of visibility in Japan. Um, so the second one is, can we call Japan a Buddhist nation? I don't think we can call it a Buddhist nation either, because it doesn't have any
State
national
religion.
sort of role to
Hmm.
play like it used to do. And also, as we have seen, it is not easy to say if Japan is a Buddhist majority country in terms of the number of followers, because I mean we have the problem of statistics. But however, given the long presence of Buddhism in the country, we can probably say Japan is culturally Buddhist, a culturally Buddhist society, because the Japanese culture and also like Japanese worldview and also language still display many Buddhist elements. So yeah, culturally Buddhist, I would say.
I mean, looking at what the state has, clearly mentioned in their, I guess, some of the charters, I guess, back in 50s, 1950s or 900, 1900. Uh, do you think that Japanese state, accepting that there shouldn't be one religion or a couple religions to be the state religion by the Japanese state, has kind of, uh, led the country to this development in their own ways? What if the Japanese government has accepted one religion to be the state religion? Uh,
Mm.
do you think that the country would have developed differently, or do you think the success the Japan has been acquiring in their own ways was due to not identifying Japan uh, as Japan has a state religion?
Right. I mean,
What are the
that's
pros and cons of the both?
yeah, that's can be a little bit controversial because a Meiji government, as we have seen, wanted to promote Shinto as a kind of a new ideology, spiritual ideology for the nation building that they were embarking on. And at some point, they came up with this policy about religions. They said, okay, well, Shinto is above all the religions, and it's actually non-religion. There is a theory of Shinto as non-religion, and all the other religions, or the other major religion, let's say. So there are a list of list of groups that are considered religion, and then there's yet another list lower down, list of things that are called pseudo religions. And so Buddhism, Buddhism, Christianity, and then I think Islam didn't make it. But so all these major religious groups are called religions, whereas Shinto was overarching sort of overarching principle for all the religions and pseudo religions. So that is before the war, and then so the Shinto had the status of de facto status of state religion, although they didn't want to call it religion, right?
Mhm.
And so after the war, because of what Japanese military and government managed to do in the name of Shinto-based ideology in the rest of Asia, they really had to renounce this model of Shinto as a centerpiece of Japanese governments, and it was a very strict and unrationalized sort of decision that they made. So there was, therefore, there was a absolutely almost chaotic sort of sense of freedom of religion. And after the World War II, and according to some, this is also partly why groups like Omo Shinrikyo developed so much without being controlled. So I think there's been a little bit of turnaround about a little bit of control or like monitoring.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, okay, what are your thoughts about uh, Japanese Buddhism, which was actually nourished and influenced by the Japanese culture? How much uh, has the Japanese culture influenced Japanese Buddhism that we see in today's different contexts? Be that,
Mm.
I think people call Shinto Buddhism, right? Some they add Shinto as a Buddhism. I have heard, not
Well,
as
so,
Shinto.
But I don't know if they consciously call it Buddhism, called Shinto Buddhism, but
Shinto.
it's true that a lot of people, ordinary people, are not quite sure about exact difference between Shinto and Buddhism. Because if you go to a Shinto shrine in Buddhist temple, you actually get the same set of services.
Hmm.
So from an outside point of view, they are still very similar and have so much in common.
So how much has the culture in Japan influence impacted the Japanese Buddhism that we see in today's time?
Right. So this is actually a fascinating and very broad question. So I want to mention just one thing here, which is the life-affirming attitude within Japanese Buddhism. And now, life-affirming, I mean an appreciation of the phenomenal world, the physical world, including the vicissitudes of life, and particularly nature for as it is, namely for the nature's transient and fragile way, fragile nature of the natural world. And clearly, this is a departure from the earlier Buddhist teaching because, according to this, the impermanence of the world is something problematic and to be transcended, right? And there is a key Japanese Buddhist concept that indicates this shift of perspective from a, let's say, a slightly life-denying or, impermanence as a bit problematic to the impermanence as something good. This this concept is hongaku, which means original enlightenment. And according to this concept, which was developed within Tendai school, everything in the world, especially nature, is originally or inherently enlightened. So therefore, they said, mountains, rivers, plants or grass, and trees all have the Buddha nature, and they all attain Buddhahood. Now, if you're familiar with Mahayana Buddhism, the teaching that all sentient beings have the Buddha nature is a prominent Mahayana Buddhist concept. But do mountains and rivers and plants also have it, the Buddha nature? So this idea seemed to have originally developed in Chinese Buddhism, but it really came to the fore in Japanese Buddhism through the concept of hongaku. And I personally think this is partly because of the animistic nature of the classical Japanese mentality. You may call it ancient Shinto. And a good example of this kind of mentality we can still see today in Japan is the Japanese appreciation of cherry blossoms, which are at their best only for a few days in a year, right? So thanks to their transitoriness and fragility, cherry blossoms are considered to have a special beauty and value. And this is very Japanese, I would say.
Great. Let's turn to different types of Buddhisms. Why? I understand in Japan, the main types of Buddhism seem to be Mahayana. Um, you know, as we understand, Theravada is more likely about, philosophical thoughts as well as very, I guess, conservative to some conservative and hardcore and very orthodox type of Buddhism. But why was Theravada not taken roots in Japanese soil? That's one question. Why Mahayana took roots to this extent? Was it because the Japanese people are more liberal and Theravada was not their desideration or their choice of spirituality? And what may have happened looking at different types of Buddhism with Theravada?
Right. There's a very simple question that why Theravada didn't catch on or take root in Japan before the contemporary times was that simply it was not introduced. People didn't know it. The non-Mahayana, very little non-Mahayana Buddhism, types of Buddhism were introduced in Japan. And then the first proper attempt to introduce Theravada Buddhism in Japan was only in the late 19th century. And this is when a Japanese monk from the Shingon school called Shaku Konen, or Konen Shaku, was ordained actually in Sri Lanka in about 1890s. And after returning to Japan, he also sent a few more monks to Sri Lanka to be ordained. This is because he wanted to establish his ethnic Japanese Sangha, Japanese Theravada Sangha. But however, unfortunately, his attempt to maintain the Theravada monastic lifestyle did not succeed. I mean, there was simply not enough support. So now we can ask why. there was not enough support. So one of the reasons for this failure seemed to have been the traditional Japanese perception of Theravada as Hinayana, the lesser vehicle. And so, in other words, there was a sense of superiority towards Theravada Buddhism among Japanese Buddhists. But obviously, as you know, the recently transition from using Hinayana to using Theravada or Jozabu in Japanese translation of the term has begun to take effect in popular understanding. And one figure who has contributed to this process is Venerable Albo Mulle Sumanasara from Sri Lanka. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with his work, but he has taught in Japan since early 1990s and then establishing the Japan Theravada Association in 1994. So, but it's obviously not only his merit. In the background, more generally, there is the increasing availability of teachings of other Theravada teachers from Thai or Burmese traditions. And also, we should not forget the global surge of interest in meditation and mindfulness. So all these things are making Theravada Buddhism more visible and accessible to the Japanese. So things are changing. And also, Venerable Chandima, you have been involved in the spread of Theravada teaching in Japan. So I really thank you for that.
Well, I mean, we should bring to light the precious works of Venerable Dr. Alubuni Sumanasara, which you wrote an article to one of the journals. Venerable Sumanasara actually started the first Theravada association, I guess, Japanese Theravada Association in Tokyo. I mean, I don't know, I mean, why? As you said that Theravada was not simply introduced. That's why it was not, given to, it was not shared among the participants who really want to accept it. Perhaps because this secularization of religion and there were Mahayana monks and nuns, probably they might not like this idea because Theravada is more, conservative and then kind of, bringing hardcore kind of teachings. Because we see this struggle in the West. I have seen some Theravada monks having some challenges with some Japanese scholars in some of the Western countries. Probably they don't like. I have heard from some monks. Probably there is a kind of a philosophical gap because the Mahayana Buddhism has more roots from Theravada as well. So probably they might think that we don't know that much. I mean, especially what the Theravada teachings are all about. But I think, as you said, with the service of Venerable Sumanasara, because he speaks good Japanese. At the same time, he has his own organization. Plus, recent developments of Theravada. Some Burmese monks, Thai monks have gone to Japan, and they are, probably they are, I guess, giving talks, and there are translations. And I have contributed as well. I want to say my colleague there, Yoshiko Demura. She has actually contributed a lot, translating my English works. And we've done a lot of books and articles, especially these articles were published under the Japanese Theravada Association. Yeah, so, yeah, you give an answer. The answer was, it was not introduced properly. So this was why it was not prevalent. Yeah.
Interesting, Bhante, is that really coming back to this 19th century political change that affected the level of monasticism, monastic observance within Japanese Buddhism. When Shakukozin, so the first thing is that there has been sporadic movements within Japanese Buddhism, particularly in Shingon, esoteric school, interest in Vinaya, because Vinaya, as in early Buddhist context, was never properly implemented in Japan. What they had was the so-called Mahayana Vinaya, or Mahayana precepts. So the Vinaya, as in the classical Buddhist sense, was never a part of Japanese Buddhism, although they had all these celibacy and everything, all these precepts that are called Mahayana Vinaya. So, so the first thing that there has been this recurring sort of, although small, but recurring interest in implementing Vinaya, which I think culminated in this person's decision to go to Sri Lanka and get ordained and then trying to plant Theravada Vinaya in Japan. And this coincided with this maybe spread of this government policy to allow monks to get married and everything. So I think there is some sort of a double incentives for him to really try to give it a go at Theravada Vinaya project.
I mean, that's very interesting. And what you say is that only the Dhamma part was introduced and not the Vinaya. So, yeah, so I mean, it may have some links to the cultural sensibility of how people, how, the existing Sangha accept these kind of things. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but my final question. What are your thoughts on Japanese religiosity or non-religiosity, religion or non-religion, and in particular, the future of Buddhism in Japan? I mean, looking at a couple decades from now, uh, what are your thoughts about their future, religion, non-religion, and Buddhism in particular?
Right. So, thank you, Bante. As we have seen, I mean, obviously, it's not easy to say if the Japanese are religious or non-religious. So, especially given the Western parameters used in talking about religion. So, as both coming from non-Western context, I really hope that we can continue our discussion about how to describe so-called religion in non-Western context, and perhaps even by using non-Western concepts themselves from Buddhism or other traditions that might actually help us explain what religion plays itself out in non-Western context. So, having said that, traditional Buddhist practice centered around family-based affiliation with a temple is clearly in decline, right, in Japan. And the major new religions are not as powerful as they used to be. So in this sense, the Japanese are less religious, probably, than say 100 or 50 years ago. But personally, I'm not sure if they will be even less religious in the future. Perhaps the level of religiosity will not decrease so much, but it will take a different form.
Mhm.
And actually, we already have some indications for this. So, first, and this is kind of obvious, but whether they claim to be religious or not, people in Japan today face many, if not more, social, economic, and personal issues. And there's much need for teaching that helps people deal with these issues, enhance their emotional well-being, and regain their sense of connection with others. And so this is one thing. And in the lieu of this, I personally do not think non-religious means, whether it is psychotherapy or counseling or more informal mutual help groups, will make Buddhism or religion in general redundant. Indeed, some traditional Buddhist temples are exploring ways to reach out to more individuals, not only in their locality, but also beyond, by being more open and inclusive and providing wider range of services. So they're already trying new venues. And second indication is that there has been a transition from family-oriented affiliation to a more individual involvement with religion. So in the future, the sense of membership or affiliation with a particular group may become even less strong and more fluid, and people may pick and choose more freely from whatever is available. So, in other words, religion will become more about personal choice or a combination, where necessary, of personal choice and family concerns. And finally, thanks to the ever increasing use of the internet, we have opportunities to learn from teachers from different schools and countries. I mean, like this, right? I can talk to Venerable Chandima, although we happen to be in the same country at the moment. So there are these indications for the future, and to humbly conclude, I think these factors are creating a chance, and rather than simply a challenge, for both Japanese Buddhist schools and other schools such as the Theravada to really make further contributions in Japan. And I really hope this will be the case.
Great. What marvelous, remarkable insights that you ponder over the future of uh, Japanese perception about Buddhism as well as religion or non-religiousness. Dr. Kieko, you have anything you think that you may have missed out on? You wanted to add anything out of our conversation?
No, I'm fine.
Okay,
I've
you did
spoken
that. You
quite a
covered
lot,
everything.
so.
Okay,
Mhm.
great. Thank you, Dr. Kieko. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Uh,
for having me.
yeah, Dhamma folks, today we've been actually discussing about non-religiousness in 21st century Japan, and we were actually starting out with a norm, kind of thing that a lot of people may have not seen, uh, to reflect that there is an unwarranted ethnocentric assumption that the Japanese people, they are they are not religious. They are more likely atheists, or they are religious nuns. But this is due to the Abrahamic monotheistic stereotype, which has not been able to trace out the exact the true nature of their religiosity. So we wanted to actually look at their Japanese religiosity uh, by moving beyond the theocentric approaches, and then to tap into their own ways of expressing uh, the Japanese religiosity or non-religiousness, in particular the Buddhist evolution and the nature of different Buddhists in their country. And Dr. Kieko has been explaining to us different intersections about this topic, and she was explaining to us about religion and non-religion from a basic theoretical standpoint, and she also explained to us about the basic religious and non-religious groups that exist in the modern Japan, and also different characterizations of Japanese religious norms, non I guess believing without belonging, belonging without believing, believing in belonging. And we moved on to the secularization part, which is a part of the evolution of Japanese religion, with a particular emphasis on Buddhism. And we were actually pretty much discussing about how things went into different stands, especially
Mhm.
monks were allowed to drink alcohol, they were allowed to marry, they were allowed to be more secularized in terms of the state, decision for different reasons. And as you said, that it was because that the state wanted to favor Shinto, and probably that might have been the reason. And we also discuss about the vibrant non-religious movements, especially in modern Japan, looking at uh, different movements, religious movements in Japanese context that are really uh, arisen as a part of addressing the younger folks, because they are not addressed in the traditional religious traditions, more or less. And we also talked about what is being a Buddhist in both ancient Japan and modern Japan. And we addressed this fundamental question: is Japan a religious country, or can we call it a Buddhist nation? And the answer was no to each question. We had to see it differently. And also we looked at how has the Japanese culture influenced the Japanese religion, especially Buddhism. And finally, we also talked about why Theravada Buddhism did not take roots. It was because it was not properly introduced. And even in today's time, I guess there are not many monks who can speak Japanese, especially
Mhm.
Theravada Sangha. So we talked about Venerable Album Sumanasara Thera's even service to Japanese Theravada Buddhism. And finally, we concluded the future, and you concluded about the future of Japanese Buddhism and Japanese religiosity and non-religiousness in the few decades in the time to come. And you specifically brought up something very interesting. It is not that people might be changed; the ways how the ways and means how they practice religion will be changed with the virtual formats and with the demanding needs that are coming out at different times in the future. Yeah, so now folks, today joined with me was Dr. Kieko Obuse from Montreal, Canada. It's not that far from here, Ottawa. And she is currently a co-editor of the Oxford Handbook of the Sociology and Middle East, which is going to be published by OUP, Oxford University Press, in New York, in probably next year. And in addition to that, she is currently an affiliate member of the School of Religious Studies, McGill University, Montreal, and a visiting researcher at Kobe City University of Foreign Studies, Japan. And her fundamental research interests are Buddhist Muslim relations. Not many scholars have studied this intersection, especially because this is rather daunting to learn Islamism, because a lot of I think people from Buddhist perspective, they are hardly looking at Islamic intersection with Buddhism. So you are doing that. That's such a very great thing. And Islam in Japan and Buddhism beyond Asia, with an emphasis on the Thai Theravada tradition, where you taught for a couple of years, many years, being a faculty member at Mahidol University in Thailand. Thank you very much, Dr. Kieko Obuse. It's been almost hour and a half. We pretty much planned for 1 hour or maximum, but I didn't want to speed up because I knew that this would take a little bit longer, because we need to explain this a little bit more rather than just only end up with the theoretical points of view. Thank you very much, Kieko Obuse.
Yeah, thank you very much for your interesting questions and a wonderful
Okay.
discussion. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dhamma folks, for being with us, and we'll see you with another episode so in the near future. Thank you. Have a good day. Take care. Be safe. Thank you.